County supervisors must approve the list of voting center locations. They could have a lot more polling locations if a state Senate bill becomes law. 13 News reporter JD Wallace is live at Pima County election headquarters with the potential impact. JD?
Val, in addition to early voting by mail, the county uses voting centers instead of using polling sites in each precinct. Finding enough workers for this expansion could be an issue.
Voting centers have provided a location for voters registered in the county to cast ballots and, along with mail-in ballots, cut down on the resources needed in elections. State Senate Republicans have a bill that would require each precinct to have a polling site for the voters in that precinct, along with voting centers, should a county still want those also. Right now, the Pima County Elections Director recommends 122 voting centers compared to 265 precincts in the county. And the bill requires at least 3 election workers per polling site, meaning 795 workers could be needed. While it could bring an in-person polling location closer to some voters, it concerns Pima County's lobbyist Michael Rossi, who says voters have found voting centers convenient and says it is also becoming difficult to nearly impossible to find locations and people to staff conventional precincts. He adds that he and the county are actively working with legislative members on the issue.
This bill would allow precincts to consolidate more than one precinct using a polling site. If the Senate passes this bill, that would still face the House and then face the governor. Reporting live from the South Side, JD Wallace, 13 News.
All right,